Would you believe me if I told you that even Jesus Christ took part in the final battle?
You didn't have to cut me off. Like we were nothing.
Hey guys, how are you? I hope you're doing well. I'm the Monio, the interdimensional demon who talks about Twilight of Gods the most on YouTube, and you're on my channel. Let's get straight to the point. Is this animation worth watching? Well, if you're a fan of director Zack Snyder's films, I don't think so. But if you like animations with explicit sexual content, Norse mythology and bloody battles, I would say maybe yes, but this animation gave me some very strange feelings. Let's understand better. First, I would like to talk about the first thing that really caught everyone's attention in this series, which is the visual style of the animation, which I noticed divided people a little. Some liked it and others didn't, but the most contradictory thing about this visual style of the characters is that it manages to be both a positive and a negative point at the same time. And don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily talking about personal taste, because I like the style of the characters. It's very different and interesting. It reminds me a bit of old Disney movies. In fact, it looks like a mix of Disney's 2D animation with more stylized animations like Samurai Jack. The problem isn't the style itself. The problem is the fact that this visual style doesn't match all this bloody and sex-filled atmosphere that the animation brings. And I understand the fact that the production opted for a simpler look in order to make better and more fluid action scenes. And in fact, the action scenes are very good, but I really don't think the character's style matches the things that are happening on the screen. And an interesting thing to mention is that in one of the trailers for the series, released by Netflix, words like blood and sex are highlighted. And this says a lot about the way Zack Snyder treats and prioritizes the elements of his works, and the director's obsession with always being adult, epic and realistic, with stories that take themselves very seriously, with scenes that are often dark, but that prioritize visual beauty. And it's strange because this animation doesn't communicate much with these languages that are so characteristic of the director. Zack Snyder is a very controversial guy. Some consider him a terrible director, others think he's a misunderstood genius. But regardless of whether you like his work or not, it's undeniable that he has a very characteristic style, and for me it was very strange that this animation deviates a little from this style. But even so, it still has some of Snyder's directing vices, mainly in the construction of the characters, or perhaps in the lack of construction. The characters are probably the weakest point of the series, not because they are horrible, but in my opinion, none of them are interesting enough or charismatic enough for you to care, and when you don't care about the characters you can hardly feel a sense of danger, excitement, or satisfaction with the narrative arcs of these characters. Most of them even try to be interesting because of their looks. They have a cool look, like for example the guy who is wearing a wolf skin. The problem is that they are very one-dimensional. There's one character that I would like to highlight that I really liked, which is Loki. This version of Loki is very interesting. It is much more faithful to Norse mythology than the Marvel Studios version, and the series manages to do a good job contextualizing his motivations while adding layers to the way the character acts and the events that led him to be the way he is, and how this is reflected in his relationship with the other gods and even in his personality. At first he seems like just another generic villain, but the way the narrative chooses to work with his past and how this creates conflict is very interesting, and makes him the most developed character in the series, in my opinion, which was a surprise, because based on the way the character was presented, I thought his journey would be generic and would have a lot of problems. In fact, most of the problems we see in other Zack Snyder films like Rebel Moon are related to the characters, and most of them are repeated here, and one of the things I find most ridiculous is the way they assemble the team of heroes, which is completely unrealistic and meaningless. The protagonist basically goes after some character to compose his army. This character asks what he gains by helping the protagonist, and the protagonist responds, "You don't gain anything, and you'll probably still die." So the character responds, "Of course I'll help you on this suicidal adventure, why not?" And these conveniences in the script are simply unbelievable. The way some characters who don't even know each other risk their lives for strangers is something hard to imagine, and it happens all the time. It's an army that appears at an extremely convenient time, says that it heard about the protagonist's story and that it will help, even knowing that most of them will die in battle, for a fight that isn't even theirs, and that they could simply remain neutral. Basically, the thing that holds the most attention in this series is the theme, which is very interesting. The entire pantheon of gods and all the figures from Norse mythology seem to be very well represented, especially the best-known gods and the not-so-well-known stories, especially involving Loki. You can see that the series had a good job of consulting so that several things would be very faithful to the legends. but the series also creates its own stories, rules, and revelations about the best-known elements of this mythology, such as the concept of Valhalla not necessarily being a paradise for warriors to rest eternally, but rather a way for Zeus to capture the souls of the warriors he considers valuable and have a powerful army at his disposal. I'm not sure if this concept is a creation of the series or not, but I believe so. However, if you know a lot about Norse mythology, I ask that you comment if possible to confirm this information. Regardless of whether it is a creation of the series or not, I found the concept very interesting and it makes sense within the logic of the series of villainizing the gods and showing the side of those who have always been seen as villains, especially in the relationship between Loki and Thor. These relationships between the deities are quite interesting, and the series makes good use of them to create the expectation of what will happen to the gods in a possible battle against them. So even though the main characters aren't interesting, the plot becomes interesting because of the pantheon of Norse gods. You'll really be engaged to find out what's going to happen to them, since it's basically a revenge story. What will keep you in the series is seeing these gods in action and knowing what's going to happen to them, since the plot is basically a revenge story of the protagonist against Thor, son of Odin, but there are many other things at stake that will be triggered by a possible defeat of the gods. The ending of the series, despite being strange, is quite surprising, because it subverts several expectations of what we thought was going to happen, and delivers an ending with a lot of consequences for the main characters and big changes for that world. At the end, we have a somewhat unusual scene involving Jesus Christ, which at first seemed very strange, but then when everything is contextualized you understand that it was a scene to show the world in the present day, in which people no longer worship the gods of Norse mythology, and it also fits in very well with the Christian references that Zack Snyder usually puts in his productions, which curiously indicates that that reality is in fact our world, but in the future, before the coming of Christ on earth and Christianity itself, and that was really surprising. I can't say that I found it a good narrative decision, but it is undeniably something unexpected. I believe that if you really like animations that have no restrictions on violence and that deal with the theme of Norse mythology, I believe that you will like the series, but if you are a fan of Zack Snyder's work, there is a good chance that you will not recognize many of the striking characteristics in this series. But what about you? What did you think of Twilight of Gods? Have you watched it? Do you agree with what I said? Leave it in the comments, and if you liked the video, subscribe to follow the next content. Until next time my people, demonic hugs.